This talk is going to be a little introduction to Flutter, what it is and why we should use it for maybe our company or for the next project that we are trying to build. So I'm going to speed through this. Who am I? As Roxana said, I'm Gonçalo Palma. There is just a little bit, the little thing. I am now at FreeRain and I'm the lead Flutter developer for FreeRain. And from my background, I started as a QA engineer and then I transitioned to a native Android developer. With Yanum, I discovered the passion for Flutter, could build a full-blown app. From then, I transitioned to FreeRain, where we are building a Flutter web app. So, what is Flutter? Flutter is a mobile framework from Google that allows us to create apps for mobile, desktop, and web. And the cool thing about it is that it uses a single code language, Dart. And one of the other things about Flutter is that it uses a declarative UI. If you were an Android or an iOS developer, you remember that before you had to create your XML files, you had to create your Java files, and on one hand you put all your UI logic on the XML files, and then on the other files, the Java files, you put your business logic. And this could be sometimes rather confusing. So with Flutter and Dart, what happens is that we have the UI and the business logic in one file and in one single language. This means that if we want, for example, to change the way that our app feels, the business logic, we can change it. If we want to change it how it looks, we can also change it within the same file. So what makes it special? Why is it that so many people now are trying to adopt it? The first thing that pulled me is the hot reload. Again, as an Android developer, sometimes I had to build large apps. The compilation was about 3-4 minutes. Then if the app had a login screen and I had to test another screen, I would have to enter the app, go through the login process, enter several screens, and then I could finally see my changes. But with Flutter, we have a thing called hot reloads. Basically, Flutter runs on when we are in debug mode, it runs over a Dart virtual machines, and we can directly inject our code in that virtual machine, which means, as you can see here from the GIF, that if we change something in our code, the changes will be directly reflected on our application. So we can change the text, we could change the colors, or we could even add new navigation and new screens that we could always reflect the changes instantaneously. Now, also a good thing, more than for mobile development, is that it compiles directly to native code. This means that although this is a hybrid framework, it's not native such as Java or Swift, the app will have a near native experience and near native performance. This is because the attitude that Flutter has is that it works like a game engine. It's not saying, please render here me a text view with some properties and here an app bar. It is merely saying, okay, so at this part of the screen, please render a box. That box will have X dimensions and there will be some text or some pixels inside it. And that's why it can be so fast as it is, even in older devices. As a side note, when I was working with Yanum, I had an old Samsung Galaxy Note 4, and all the apps were rather slow in it. Even Google Maps and Google Email, Gmail, and both were apps by Google. Whenever I tried to run our app, Yanum in it, the speeds were phenomenal. It was like I was looking at a new phone altogether. In the case of Flutter for Web, they are trying to improve the stability and improve the performance in it. Currently, they are using a thing called Skia, which uses WebAssembly to render our app. The performance is not as good as it is on native platforms for Android and iOS, but they are constantly improving it so that in the near future, we can use Flutter for web as we would use, for example, HTML, React, and other libraries. So, another thing about it is that it's open source. This means that if you have a specific problem in the way that it renders, for example, in a Xiaomi device, or you see that it doesn't implement correctly some widgets or have some catastrophic error, you can report it here Or if you dare to do it, you can also try to create a pull request and propose a new change for the Flutter engine or the Flutter framework. Why should we use Flutter in our applications? Well, apart from everything that I said up until now, a good thing about it is that, again, you can deploy this everywhere. And Flutter really drove to this point when in the Flutter Interact, I think it was in 2019, they did this demo when they had the counter app, which is the basic demo app for Flutter, and they deployed it to 7 devices at the same time. So they click run once, and separately in 7 devices, you can see it here running, and they could interact with them directly. So for desktop, for Android, for iOS, and for mobile. And also, the thing is, as I said before, we have a declarative UI, so the business logic and the UI logic is in the same file. And Flutter went even a step further, and if we have the same language, the same logic for the interface and for our business logic, why not make our tests also similar? So we have the unit, the unit tests, the UI integration, the UI and integration tests that if we look at them, the structure is almost the same. We declare a new test, we give it a name, then we do some verifications for the test. On the left, we are calling the function. On the right, we are finding a UI element. And when we finish it, we are going to always do the same thing. We are going to expect that what we are testing is equal to an expected result. So as you can see here, we are using the same language, almost the same methods to test both the code and the UI. And the good thing about this is that this is not a test specific to web, or this is not a test specific to mobile. This test, as it is now, is running for all platforms. And then the good thing about this is I remember that when I was an Android developer, if I wanted to find a new library, this was 3 or 4 years ago, I would have to go for blog posts or try to find on Reddit for new libraries to use, Retrofit, Dagger, etc., etc. But with Flutter, we have a centralized repository of plugins. This means that if I want to add something to the app, such for example, I want to display the camera, I want to add GPS, I want to know the device info, I can go to pub.dev and easily add it to the app that I'm working on. And finally, what for me is one of the greatest things here is that not only is Flutter open source, but it's also open in its development. So the official Flutter team, they decided to create a Discord server in which they openly discuss what they are working on, they openly discuss the issues, and sometimes even we have the technical documents that they are using to plan their new features. Now we had a revamp of the navigation in Flutter, but that document was openly available before they implemented it for quite some months now. So if we have an issue, if we have a specific issue, or even if we want to contribute to the future of Flutter, we can do it and talk directly to the people in charge and to the maintainers of Flutter. And I think that this is just awesome because it not only shows how open the platform is, but it's also trying to invite us to contribute more and in order to make Flutter better for everyone. Now, this is all good, but a framework is only as good as the companies or as the people using it. So who is using it? This is a slide from more or less 2 years ago, so it's a bit out of date since more companies have tried to adopt Flutter, but you can see here that we have companies such as BMW, we have eBay, we have even MR that is not here, Google, of course, the New York Times, and so many others. And since, of course, I had to say this, since I'm working on free reign, we are also using Flutter for our main application and information website, which you can see here on the screenshots. We are currently developing an application for the equine industry. We are opted to do it for web, and we started doing with Flutter. Why did we opt for Flutter? Because if tomorrow we want to share our application in Android and iOS or even in desktop, we can easily do it by deploying it to the respective platform. Now, this is all good and fun, but let's get our hands dirty. And let's start with an introduction to Dart. In Dart, we can start by assigning variables. A variable can be assigned with the var keyword. You can see on the first line I say var name equals to Gonçalo. I'm not saying here that if it's a string or a boolean because Dart can infer directly the variable if I assign it. On the second line, it was my choice. I can decide to explicitly declare a variable by giving the appropriate type, string, boolean, and class name, etc. And of course, if I want to make my variable not variable, I can make it at final. You can see that my nationality is Portuguese. I declare it with the final keyword, and if I try to change it on the following line, it will throw me an error because this final, it can only be assigned once. Now, one of the things that I also like about Dart is that it makes it easier to format strings. So on the first few lines, I'm declaring a constant, a variable called Gonçalo, and then I declare a function to get my last name, Palma. And then I can create a string called full name that first, with the $sign, I can refer directly a variable, in this case name, but I can also refer to a function, the get last name. And inside these curly brackets, I could put some conditional logic with a terminal operator. I could call other functions even with arguments. I could do lots of stuff. And this shows the power of string formatting. So I don't need to put plus and getting out of the I can't remember the aspas. It's aspas in my language. And we don't need to do that. We can just use the variable names directly, or we can use the function name directly, and finally we can print it. Now, we are also going to need functions in order to create a good code base. So every function can declare a return type. In this case, we can see that it's of type string, or it can have no return type, which is void. As with many other languages such as JavaScript, we declare the return type, the name of the function, and then all the arguments that we need, and finally a body. And we are going to talk here just a little more about the main function, which is used as the entry point for the app. So whatever we want to run, be it a print function, be it our whole app, we are going to put it inside the main void function. Now, if we want to make our functions even more fun, we can use something called the name arguments. Usually when we declare a function, we declare it with the first name and last name, and we cannot change the order. So we cannot put the last name first, and we have to use both variables at the same time. But what happens if I wanted to create a function in which I may or may not use some arguments? I could change the order if I wanted, and I would have default values. So as you can see here, I have the get identity function. It will accept a first name, it will accept a nationality, but it's inside curly brackets. This means that they are name arguments. And the nationality even has here an equals unknown. What does this mean? This means that if for some reason I didn't assign a string to the nationality, then it will display unknown. If we look now at main, we see that in the first print, I'm using the get identity first function, and first I say my nationality is Portuguese, and then my first name. So I not only reordered the parameters, but I also use their names. And then the second one, I don't want to display my nationality, so I just use first name. My first name is Gonçalo, so it will print Gonçalo is unknown, the default value that we used here. One interesting thing is that we can use functions in functions, and I don't know if I lost you or not, because let me see here.
We're still here.
Oh, good.
I'm still here. Okay, because the Zoom window just disappeared, so I assume that I'm here. Now, functions within functions. Sometimes we not only want to pass a boolean, an integer, or even a class for a function, we could also use a function inside a function. Why do we need this? Imagine that I'm creating a function to greet someone. And in some countries, we use the convention of first name and last name, Gonçalo Palma, but in others we could use the opposite and start with the last name, Palma Gonçalo. So we can do that. We use the type def, which is a special keyword, and I say that I want a function that will return me a string and accept two parameters, a first name and a last name. And of course, I'm going to give a name of this function, in this case, full name. So how can we use this? Well, in the function getFullData, which is going to output or to print the greeting message, I will display the greeting. I will have an argument, the greeting, the first name, the last name, and then I will accept my function. And on the next slide, we can see, again, full name. On the next slide, we can see that in order to use this, the only thing that I need to do is to declare a function with any name that follows the same signature. So if a function returns a string and it has as an argument two fields that are also strings, then I can use it. As I said first, I have here first name and the last name for the getField name, and then a function called getAlternativeFullName that will output first the last name and then the first name. I call that function with the three strings that I need, and the function that I'm using, the getFullName, it prints hello Gonçalo Palma, or I can use the alternative full name and it will print hello Palma Gonçalo. And in this case, I did not have to change the implementation of the getFullData function to have two different functions. I can just say, okay, I will output something. In this case, I'm going to output a greeting and the full name, and I'm going to construct my full name string with any function that I can fit in here. Now, this is all fun, but if I don't have Dart or Flutter installed in my machine, how can I try this? Well, we have a good tool and a good online tool called Dartpad. And Dartpad allows us to quick test our code online. So we can go to dartpad.dartlang.org, and as you can see here, I'm just having a simple main function with a for loop that will print an output. I click on run and I can have the output on the right. All good, but what if I want to also try Flutter? Well, 2 years ago they added this functionality, and now if I want to try and test simple Flutter apps, I can just paste it all in here, run it, and it will show the output on the right. Now that we have gone through the simple steps of Dart, I did not cover here things like conditionals or for loops because they are very similar to other languages like JavaScript, like Java, Swift, etc. And with all that done, I'm going to do a quick introduction to Flutter. So the first thing that you need to know about Flutter, and that everyone will tell you, is that in Flutter, everything is widgets. And when I say everything, it's literally everything. So if I want to render anything on the screen, it will be a text widget. If I want to position that on the screen, it will be a center widget. If I want to animate the opacity of that text element, it's going to be an animated opacity widget. So we even have special kind of widgets for things like navigation. So we have the navigator widget that will handle the in-app navigation. So to summarize, everything is a widget. And since everything is the widget and we can use it to both render UI elements and position them on screens, how can we use it? So I want to display some text, and this is when I congratulate the Flutter engineers. We have a widget called text. Pretty clear, right? So the first argument is going to be the text that we want to display. And then we can have, as you can see here, named arguments because they have the variable name here and the two dots. And in this case, I'm saying that I want the text direction from right to left like we have in Arabic language. So the text is just reiterating what I said. So again, we can add more properties with name arguments to this text widget. Here I'm saying that I want align it to the end, and then I'm going to give it some style. This style will be in the form of colors. I'm going to give it a white color, and I'm going to add a font weight to it so that the text can be displayed as bold. Now, as I said, everything is a widget. So if I want to position this widget in the center of my screen, I'm going to wrap it in center widget. And this slide shows two interesting things. First, it shows, of course, the center widget that is used to align elements on the screen, but it also shows a particular thing about Flutter, which is we have a parent-child relationship with our widget tree. So if I have a text widget and I want to center it on the screen, I'm going to wrap it inside a center widget that has a single property called child. And this will result in something that we'll see in basic Flutter apps that will have a tree like this. The effect is called Kamehameha or Hadoken, where we have large chunks of code that are inner brackets, which is the widget tree. So one widget has a child which is another widget, which has a child that is another widget, and so on. Apart from the center, we can have also other widgets such as the row or column that are used to arrange multiple widgets, as the name implies, in a row or a column. Now, what widgets should we be using? Flutter provides us a widget catalog in which we can see all the widgets that they give us by default. Widgets for accessibility, widgets for animations, buttons, text, layout widgets, etc. So if you are curious if the widget that you want is present in the framework or not, you can go directly to the widget catalog. Now, what if we want to create our own widgets, because maybe the designer specified that she wanted a specific button, or that she wanted an interaction, an animation that is something custom and not built in Flutter? Well, we can create our own widgets, of course. But the first question that we must ask is it a stateless widget or is it a stateful widget? What is the difference? Well, if we are creating an UI element that will not change over time, think of it as a background or something that is static, then we will say that it's a stateless widget. But if we have something that is going to change over time, for example, you are displaying the time on the screen and it's going to change every minute or every second, we will say that it's a stateful widget. What are the exact differences in implementation? So if I want to create a stateless widget, I just create a class. I will say that it extends from the stateless widget class. And the only thing that I need to do is to override the build methods, and inside it, I will put every widget that I want to share, I want to build. In this case, I'm just going to build a text widget saying welcome to the app. So what's the difference for stateful widgets? They seem at first a little more complicated, but if we break it down, they're mostly the same. We will have a class that will stand the stateful widget, but it's not inside here that we're going to build our widgets. We are going to say, okay, this stateful widget class is going to create a state, which is another class, which is basically to say the state is where we put all our UI elements and the current state or the status of our widgets. So if we have different variables for the name, first name, the colors of the screen, we will hold it there in that state class. And that state class is going to, again, have the build function and do something. Now here, what I'm doing is I declared a text variable called welcome to the app, as I did previously, and I wrap this in a gesture detector. As the name is implying, I'm detecting some gestures over this widget. So when the user taps on the text element, I'm going to call the setState function. What does this do? It's going to say to this widget, look, something has changed in me, but what has changed? Oh, the text. The text changed from welcome to the app to thank you for clicking me. So the result is whenever the user clicks on the text, it's going to change the text from welcome to the app to thank you for clicking me. So again, to summarize, if we have some element on the screen that is going to change, like for example a greeting message, we can do it inside the stateless widget. It's not going to change. But if we have some kind of interaction in our application that we want to change something to the user, then we are going to use a stateful widget. Now, one of the most important widgets that we are going to use, that's going to be the root widget for most of the applications, is the Material app, or if we are using iOS, the Cupertino app widget. In it, we are going to customize our application in terms of navigation, the themes that we are using, for example, the color scheme, the type of the typeface of the text, etc., the title and the localization. Because, for example, I can have all my app's text in English, but maybe if a user has their phone in Arabic, I want to showcase my app displaying the Arabic text. So it's going to be mainly a widget called Material app. We define everything that we want. In this case, I'm saying that my title is going to be business card. I'm using a theme which is going to use a palette color of blues. And my home, or my initial widget that I'm going to display, is a business card widget. And finally, we have the Material app widget. We know how to build widgets. We know how to use widgets, but how can we render them on the screen? Well, we can use I duplicated the same slide. We can use the run app function. The run app function is going to be inside main, and usually for most apps, what it's going to do is to wrap the Material app widget. So we can read this in plain English. My main function, so the entry point of my app, is going to run an application called main app. And if we go to the previous slide, the my app is a widget that will have all the specifications for my app, including the themes and the initial widget that I want to display. Now, we know how to use widgets. We know how to the basics of the Dart programming language. Let's start. Oh no, wait, I added a slide just before this. Okay, imagine the following. In your app, you want to add some dependencies to it. As I talked, we can use the pub.dev to retrieve all the dependencies that you want. And you want to add Google Maps, or you want to add a state management tool as provider, or you want to add GPS, something in it. Where do I add that? Flutter has a very specific file called the pubspec.yaml file, in which we are going to include here a set of configurations. For example, the name. What is going to be the name? The name is going to be what we are going to use in the imports. So if I'm going to import one file from one path name to the other, it's going to display it as business card / businesscard.app.dart, for example. Then I can add all my dependencies. In the case of the simple app, I'm just going to say that it's going to depend on Flutter, but I could put here Firebase, I could put here the Unilink launcher so that a user can tap on the screen and open the browser. And finally, I'm going to put here all the assets that my app is going to use. So if my app uses a set of images, for example, I will put them in the project in the folder called assets, or whatever do I want. And then I will declare in the pubspec YAML, hey, I'm going to use some assets, so please load them all from the X folder. And now, yes, our first Flutter app, a business card app. The objective of this is going to create a simple application that is going to display a business card. So I took a small inspiration from a business card app that I found on Google, and I want to build this. So let's go through it step by step. The first thing that we need to see is that in Flutter, most widgets that are going to be full page use a scaffold widget. What is the scaffold class? A scaffold class is a class that knows how to position certain elements on the screen. So for example, if we want to display an app bar here at the top, or if we want to display a floating action button at the bottom, or even a button navigation bar, this widget knows how to display them and where to display them. So we are going to wrap all of our widget inside it, and we are going to say, okay, I'm going to provide a background color of gray, and I'm going to provide a body, and the body is the widgets that we are going to render. Now, you can see here that our UI element is going to be centered on the screen. So since this UI element is centered, we are going to use, again, a center widget. So we display the center, and we are going to have child or children inside it. We can see here that we have a rectangular shape It's going to have some corners and rounded corners, and it's going to have some shadow in it. This is called a material card, and Flutter provides a widget for it, again called cards. Inside this card, what are we going to display? Well, we are going to display elements that are going to be arranged vertically, and they are in a column. So we are going to use the column widget to display the image, the text, and this bar at the bottom. The column widget has some properties. In this case, what I'm saying is, okay, the main axis size, so the vertical axis, I want it to be as minimum as possible. And this says to Flutter, okay, if you have space, don't expand it. I just want to display this as little as possible with all the widgets that I have inside it. And then I will provide an array or a list of widgets to display inside it. Then I'm going to want to display an image. For images, we have several opportunities to do it. We can do it from network, or as I displayed previously, we could add them to our app on the assets folder and use it directly as an asset, which is what we are going to use it. So we add the Flutter assets and the assets folder to our pubspec.yaml file, and then we can safely use our widget image.asset, provide the path to it, and the image is going to be rendered on the screen. Then we are going to display some text. We saw previously that we can use the text widget, we provide a string to it, and then we can style it. In this case, I'm going to focus on the bottom text, Flutter developer. It's going to have a font size of 22. We can say that it's italic, so a font style of italic, and we can provide a color to it, colors.gray. And finally, we will have here a bar at the end displaying 3 colors. So the colors are displayed horizontally, so we are going to put them inside a row. And also we have a specific size for it. In this case, I said that I want a box of 20 pixels of height that is going to accommodate a list of widgets horizontally in a row. Now, how can I display here a box with yellow color? Well, we can use the container class for it. The container is going to be as simple as possible, just going to say that it's going to have a color of yellow. So since it already knows that it has to expand to 20 pixels of height, I do not need to specify here the height that I want. Now, one of the things that we see here is that we have 3 elements displayed side by side, but I don't want to input here a specific width, because here I'm displaying it in an iPhone X if my memory is correct. But if I go to another device and I said that the yellow section is 200 pixels, well, 200 pixels might look different in other devices. So what I want to do is say, okay, I'm going to have 3 elements side by side, and I want them to first have the same width and then to expand as max as possible. And for that, we have the expanded class. This class, as the name implies, it's going to expand the widget as much as it can and position that in the screen. Now, for example, imagine that you wanted to put the blue part 2 times the size as the others. Well, there's a flex property for it, and with the flex property, you can display the blue part larger than the other one, saying that this is going to have a flex factor of 2. So display it not 2 times, but display it as larger than the other 2. Now, this was a very quick presentation. I just wanted to show you the introduction to Dart, the introduction to Flutter, and with this we could create, and we did create, our first application in Flutter. I share here a link to the GitHub repository in which you can retrieve the business card example. And one of the things that I challenge you to do is to not only go here and try to copy the code from here and paste it on Dartpad. Try to go back a little more. Yeah, Dartpad. Paste it here, because here you can use all the code that I use and change it to make it yours. Maybe you didn't like the colors. Maybe you wanted to change to your name, or you want to display a different image. Try it and break it. There's only one caveat. If you remember, I used the image.asset, and here we cannot include assets. So what I advise you to do is to try and use the image.network plugin, the image.network widget. Use an image from the network, display it, make it yours, break it, and then share it. And going back to the last slide, this is it for this talk. It was a little shorter than I wanted, but I didn't want to put too much information in it. I just wanted to explain more what is Flutter, why should we use it, and little introduction to Dart and Flutter. And since we have 5 minutes more, I just want to talk about something that is not in the slides, but that is also good to discuss. Flutter is a great tool. I've been using it for approximately 2 years, and I've used it in multiple projects, as Roxana said, in open source projects such as Estamos On and Fox, in my first company, Yanum, in free reign for web. But although I love it, it might not be the best solution for every type of project. If I want to create an application for example, for my restaurant, I have a restaurant, I want to display my menu, and I want to have a form that users can fill in and they reserve a table, for example. Well, that's going to mostly have the same UI for web, and for mobile, and it's easy enough to do because it's going to be UI, it's going to be some business logic, and it's going to be some network calls. That's easy, and Flutter is absolutely the answer for that. If I want to create a more complex app, for example, a fitness app or a running app, in which it's using the GPS, it's using the maps, and maybe I want to customize it, the UI to be different in iOS and Android, well, I can also do it. Flutter provides us a boolean called platform, in which we can derive some characteristics for it. Is it Android? Is it iOS? Is it web? So we could do a conditional layout and say, okay, if we are in Android, show a specific layout, but if we are in iOS, well, show another layout. And this way we can provide custom tailored solutions for our users. If they are used to use iOS, they will not see material elements. And if they are used to navigate it a little different in iOS, they can navigate that way. But now you tell me, okay, Gonçalo, this is pretty sweet, and I want to create an augmented reality application that is going to use native computing via a C++ library to display something on the screen. Then the native C++ library is doable. It's a little bit more of work, but we can do it. But the augmented reality part might not be as easy. Because if we are doing augmented reality, you have one library for iOS, I think it's AR Core, and for Android you have one library, but it's going to be different for each device. So although you are using one single code base, you'll probably need to create a lot of platform-specific code, so Android code and iOS code, in order to make your app work good in both Android and iOS. And if the app is simple enough and you just want to use AR Core, maybe it's best to try to go native in that solution. So Flutter is not going to be the solution for all problems. Flutter is a solution for most problems if we know how to use it properly. It's going to be one additional tool that we have in our tool belt, and if, for example, we know a charity that needs an application or even a website to display some simple information on it for people to donate or to join in and help them, well, Flutter is the option for that. So choose it wisely, learn it, it's very fun to use, share it, and the community is great. You have lots of places, Discord channels and Slack channels where you can ask your questions and join in the Flutter side. And yeah, that's it for me.